Welcome to the Adapt Performance Podcast, the podcast that lets you delve into the minds of world-class guests all involved in the pursuit of performance. I'm your host, Jordan Webster, and let's get into it. Yes, guys, what is going on? So today we are joined by an absolute wizard, and I do not say that lightly. Speak about me bringing on world-class guests and people that are just experts in their relevant fields within performance. Tim Stevenson is that, okay? He is an absolute brain when it comes to performance, but also specifically the shoulders, okay? And I guess first and foremost, what I need you to do is go over to his Instagram, okay? Have a look at the stuff that he is putting out there because it is super, super valuable. And I think it's stuff that you can put into practice today, okay? It's stuff that you can include and play around with and experiment with. So just as a little bit of a background then, this episode we're going to cover everything involved in performance. It's going to be a little bit about grip. It's going to be a little bit about dynamic stability. It's going to be a little bit about how you structure and build high performance shoulders, whether that is just getting back to being able to play with the kids or you're actually trying to be a competitive athlete. There is going to be some takeaways in this episode for you. It's also going to leave you with a lot of questions. It's going to challenge you in terms of your understanding, but it's also going to challenge your biases a little bit. It's going to kind of give you something to take away and think, maybe I need to experiment. Maybe I can play around with a few things. All right, cool. So as always, let us know what you think about the episode, okay? Whether that is, really enjoyed it, had some great takeaways, or whether there is a specific question or a specific element of this podcast that you really enjoyed. Let me know, let Tim know, give us some good feedback just so we can keep making this thing better and providing, valuable information. All right. So without any more waffling from King Waffler over here, let's get straight into the podcast. Cheers. Yes, Tim, how are we going, mate? Thanks for joining me.
I'm very good, thank you. I feel like privileged to be invited on. I haven't done too many podcasts on other people's shows recently, so this is a nice little treat.
You're in the hot seat, mate. You're getting put under pressure. All eyes are on you here. All ears are on you. So, what you got on today, mate? What's a day in the life of Tim?
I started with a workout, so I have to now get my training done 6:30 in the morning. So that was let's put that down under the banner of being optimally suboptimal, but it gets the workout done. And then we sort of kids out, and then it's into some online programming podcast. We're doing some stuff with the Royal Marines next week. So there's got a bit of presentation preparation for that. Just it is like generally my days at the moment are often going to be quite laptop based because we do a lot of online coaching through Dynamic Shoulders. Education preparation, it's all in. It's a little bit of a cacophony at the moment, not quite got things into place where everything is just singing, but I think most people are in a similar stage from who I talk to.
I mean, and I think I've got a few friends that are recently like new dads and parents, and I think they said that their life is like that since the little ones came along anyway. It's just reactivity constantly.
Yeah, it's full on. It's something you don't realize. I mean, Cara and I have been married 14 years, but we didn't have kids until Jack's now 5. So we had a long stretch where it was just us. And people who haven't got kids, you don't know how much time you've got. You think you're busy, but you're not. You're not actually that busy. We've got Jack's now 5, Naomi's about 18 months, and it's full on. And because now often people working from home, that area where you can work a little bit later in the evening, get up and work a little bit early in the morning when you don't have kids, you've now got these very kind of like hard stops of when the kids are up, you're busy until you get them out of the house. And then the same when they come home in the evening until they go to bed. And my focus and the way that Cara and I work, my wife and I, we run the business together. And then we are very much I am very dedicated to that co-parenting role because she's also takes a full-time role in the business. So I know sometimes people have different kind of structures in their relationships, but we're kind of like all in on that. So it does it's a very gray area, but fortunately she understands and is part of the business. So we just make it work. But it's, if you've not got kids, enjoy the time that you've got because you don't know what's coming if you go down the route of deciding to have children.
Yeah, mate, I think a few people have said this to me as well. Like those friends that have just had kids are like, mate, you need to bask in that a little bit. Because I don't have kids yet. I know it's coming. And I do look around and I think, I'm busy, but I probably spent 2 hours this morning just chilling. I've got Peep Show on. I'm just relaxing. But yeah, so tell you what, mate, let's take it back to the beginning a little bit. Give us a little bit of an insight into who you are, where you've been, what you've done, and just kind of leading us to this present moment.
Yeah, no worries. I'll try and keep this short because something we've done, obviously through School of Calisthenics, we've done quite a few podcasts, and sometimes these intros can chew up about half an hour, and then you're like, there's not enough time left. So I'm going to give you the short version. Short story is: grew up playing rugby, went to university to do business management, wanted to do sports science, but got advised around 18 that I should do business because it would give me more options. Came out of university wishing I'd done sports science. So decided I was going to go and be a scuba diving instructor for about 3 years. So I worked in Australia and Zanzibar, beach bum lifestyle, absolutely living the dream. And then got to the stage where I thought, this can't last forever because I've got to get a proper job at some point. So came back, got into sports development. Through that, met the guys at Sport 981, Ian and Gareth Hall, did an internship with them at Nottingham Trent University, took over the leadership of that program of all the tasks and performance teams at university for about 5 or 6 years. At the same time was working with some Paralympic athletes and started to build that side of my kind of specialism up. Absolutely loved the challenge and the complexity around Paralympic sport, and that's obviously where we initially connected with Carrie Denigan, and then started to kind of really push into that direction. Started working with British Para Swimming, British Athletics, had athletes at London 2012, went to the Rio Games with the Paralympics GB to do the whole GB team to do the holding camp, and then into the games environment with British Swimming to lead their physical prep for the competition period. Did some consultancy work during the Tokyo period. And then alongside all of that, I did a master's in 2015 in exercise physiology, started School of Calisthenics around 2016, something like that. And that's obviously been a very much online deep dive into online business and deep dive into the progressive nature of bodyweight training. Learned a few useful things along the way. And then up to the kind of present day is dynamic shoulder conditioning, which my wife and I started in September, October time, and that is now helping people. Let's talk about like performance-minded or fitness enthusiasts who have got shoulder pain, instability, lacking confidence, stopping them from training or living in a way that they want to, which is going to bring them the maximum amount of fulfillment. And then we're now helping those people to build strong, stable shoulders that they can have some confidence in and trust, and ultimately help them to enjoy the things that they want to do, whether that be a sports performance conversation or, you want to ski, you want to throw your kids around the swimming pool, whatever that might be.
Sick, mate. I didn't realize you was at Nottingham Trent. Actually, I didn't realize that's where you kind of were. Because I went for a job. Well, what would it have been? Maybe 3 years ago, actually. So first time kind of being in that Nottingham Trent environment. I really like the city. First time I've ever been. And didn't get the job, but it was like the whole kind of, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. It's kind of like a village type setup. Really, really nice. I like the place.
Yeah, it was great. I actually loved the time at university from a strength and conditioning coach perspective, because you get so much experience of different types of people, different types of athletes. And we used to have our squad sessions in sort of in the evenings, let's go 4 till 10 or whatever it was, back to back. And you would have women's football in, and then you go straight into men's rugby, and then you would have netball in. And the way that you have to coach and let's say your kind of the agility and how you kind of move from culture to culture, program to program, and to build buy-in. I just think there's few better environments for a strength and conditioning coach to really cut their teeth in and learn about different types of people, how to communicate and get the best out of athletes. Because like an honest challenge in that environment was men's rugby union team did not want to train legs. Like at that time, they were probably weren't at the level that they are now, but that program has kind of professionalized, for want of a better word. So it was just, how do you get these guys to do the stuff that they need to do? And you can say, oh, well, you tell them to do legs, they'll do legs. It don't work like that. That's not university sport. They were actually more interested in what they looked like when they took the shirts off, when they had a few beers on a Wednesday night. Yeah. So how do we get buy-in? How do we kind of package that up? And I think it was great. Plus all the task stuff. You get golf, horse riding, wakeboarding, you can get all that sort of stuff. It was absolutely fabulous.
No, I think, I kind of echo that. I loved the university setting because you get so much. You get those group sessions, like you said. You get tasks, so you get the individual side. So you're building your ability to apply high performance strategies to one person, but the communication that goes alongside having a one-to-one conversation. Some people really struggle having an hour's worth of conversation in between sets. So I think it throws you into that deep end of being able to actually be a social human being in a way. Yeah. But then, there's the para side as well. I would put para and then group training is two of the big things that I feel have developed myself as a coach. They're like the big rocks, I think, in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're so far out of your comfort zone with parasport. And I don't want to sound like an old man in this, but I've been in the industry like 14, 15 years. So when I first started, you go to Nottingham Trent now and they've got amazing facilities. But when I first started, my strength and conditioning sessions were in a gym, which had some equipment, in a squash court, which was converted into a gym and had some racks in there and some benches and some dumbbells. Like not an amazing all singing or dancing facility. Our speed and agility stuff was done on effectively a sports hall about the size of a badminton court. We didn't have like 3G, 4G pitches and all this sort of stuff. And the same with the para stuff. When I first got into it, the athlete that I trained to begin with was a guy called Richard Whitehead, who was a double leg amputee. At that stage, this was like 2010. There was no information out there and no other people really specializing in Paralympic S&C who you could go to and go, what's it like to train a guy who's going to go and run a marathon on prosthetic legs and a through knee amputee, so straight legs as well, so completely different running mechanics. And then how do you transfer that guy through to sprinting to go and win a gold medal at London 2012? Like nobody's done that before, but I have now. And now there's lots of other people who are also now specializing in Paralympic sport where we have got some shared knowledge and we can at least rationalize decisions, even if we still probably don't have a big literature base to lean on. But I loved it. That the para side of stuff. I honestly think a lot of people don't appreciate the value that you get from working with Paralympics athletes high enough because it massively pushes out of your comfort zone. You have to think creatively. You need to be extremely dynamic in that training environment. And to your point before around working one-on-one with athletes, I always said to like working with an athlete with cerebral palsy or a leg amputee or whatever it might be, I don't know what it's like to have cerebral palsy. So you've got to partner in this training process with me. I'm going to bring ideas to the table. You need to tell me how they work, how they feel. And you've got to start to then actually help me to think about how we're going to direct and take ownership of this program. And when we think about it, that's what we want athletes to do anyway. But it's in a power environment, you can bring that in really, really early to start to help that get them to help you and start that conversation. So massively valuable. And people shouldn't think of it as a lesser opportunity compared to working with Olympic athletes. It is of equal value in my view.
Absolutely, mate. And I think I know in the past I've kind of ragged on some of the university degrees and how much they don't necessarily prepare you for everyday life in coaching, but they're definitely getting better. I know I was speaking to one of the guys who's currently studying his master's in S&C, and he said that they've actually got like I think it's multiple workshops on parasport, and I'm like, that's amazing, that's sick, that's what we need. You know, we need more of that creative problem solving. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. So real quick, because why dynamic shoulders then? Like, what's the thing for you? Why are you not dynamic feet, dynamic toes? What's the thing?
That's a good question. One thing which I didn't sort of include in my little potted history of my career so far, when I grew up playing rugby, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, and I've also got a reasonable amount of joint laxity. I dislocated my hip when I was 11, and that's pretty severe. 2 weeks in traction for that one. But then started dislocating my shoulder. First time was around 2000. I was like 19, 20 years old. That then led down to a number of continuous dislocations until I had my first surgery, had a repair, and then went back to playing rugby, traveled a bit, came back, started playing again, had another surgery after repeated dislocations because that original repair had failed. So I went through that rehabilitation process. And what started to become apparent at that stage was the physio stuff was good, right? There's no criticism really about what the physio objectives are and how they go about repairing and rebuilding an injured shoulder. But it never got me to the stage where I actually had confidence in it. So I could lie on my back and balance a stability ball in my hand. I can do that. Neuromuscular control like 101. But what I wanted to do, particularly around the second dislocation, was get into strength and conditioning. And that was starting my career around that time. So I needed to go and learn to do a snatch for Olympic weightlifting. So I actually dislocated my shoulder on my UKSCA Olympic lifting workshop with Tim Stevenson with a 20 kilo bar doing a snatch balance, like horrible moments. But I then, so I'd been through all that, knew my shoulder wasn't good enough. So I decided that I was going to learn to handstand, because if I can handstand, then that's going to give me some confidence that my shoulder's stable. If you think about that from a rational perspective as a thought experiment, you dislocated under a 20 kilo bar. So now you're going to go and put your body weight stacked up on top of your shoulder. But I was in that sort of place where I was like, some of this has got to be of benefit. and starting to explore that calisthenics arena, if you like, which was very, very kind of like young and, let's say, kind of very niche, and it still probably is at that stage. But I was like, this is just going to give me some more tools to use with athletes. I've always wanted to find ways to improve athleticism. And I started putting stuff on my training programs for clients where athletes just like athletic development. I'm going to teach you to move in a new way that you can't currently move, because I think sport practice and training can become quite narrow. And actually, what we want from a physical preparation perspective is literacy and options to move in different ways. So fast forward through that, we did a lot of work in calisthenics, learned human flags, muscle ups, all that sort of stuff. And we started sharing some of that with coaches in S&C. And people were like, when I do this stuff, my shoulder feels amazing. When I stop doing it, my shoulder doesn't feel great. And that would be my experience. So going from being able to from dislocating under a 20-kilo bar or playing rugby, I got to the stage where I could do a human flag with no prep, no warm up, just jump up on a bar and put my shoulder into flexion external rotation, the position that you would typically dislocate in, and be absolutely fine. So that was a layer. My injury history was a layer. And then the layer on top of that was where we'd been with swimming and working with overhead athletes, as we probably can label them, for a long time, 10 years or so. And thinking there's so much out there now, and the way that training practices have changed, and there's so many people out there who don't really have the right tools to scale dynamic stability for the shoulder. So I wanted to then go and package dynamic shoulders up as an opportunity to help coaches to understand how to train their athletes to do that more effectively, and also to improve their understanding of what the shoulder is supposed to do. Because I think if you take, I'm going to generalize, but if you take a room full of industry coaches, get an athlete to take the shirt off and say, tell me what's happening at that shoulder, most people don't have a particularly good or confident in their understanding of what the shoulder is supposed to be doing. We tend to just kind of train it with the exercises that we think are going to work, but how sniper-like can we be with that? So that was one thing. And then also, like, I've seen the rise of CrossFit being in the industry, and I've seen the rise of functional fitness. And whereas we used to just go to the gym and do 3 sets of 10 or 4 sets of 8, now you've got to do 50, 40, 30, 20. And your last thing is then a load of snatches after you've already gassed your shoulder. I'm like, okay, this is the right time to help people to get a bit more robustness and resilience around the shoulder, because everyone's going out there and absolutely flogging it. And yeah, so there's a whole kind of story in there, but it really was just taking my experience and matching it what I'd done, and seeing where other people are going to struggle, and wanted to stop people from going down the route that I'd been in, which was continued year after year of issues and not being able to have confidence in the shoulder, which was stopping me from doing what I wanted to do.
Mate, I love it. It's one of those. I guess it's born out of necessity, isn't it? I think going through that kind of troublesome time, it makes you a little bit better, and it kind of changes your mindset towards, like, we need to identify the problem and build towards that. And I guess it's an interesting one. Would you take those injuries back from where you are at the moment? Do you think you would take? Would you change that, knowing where you're currently at and all the knowledge that you've gained?
I was gutted when I had to have a second surgery. I was gutted, because anyone who's had one will know that your rehabilitation process is about 6 months after you've had a shoulder surgery, because you come out of it with horrendous range of motion, and you can't back squat because you can't get into the position to rack the bar for months. So know you're going to go through 6 weeks in a sling and then into your rehabilitation process. I was gutted. And I was gutted that I had to stop playing rugby, really, because I knew that I couldn't play rugby, risk injury, and then go and be a strength and conditioning coach at the same time, because I couldn't handle it all in terms of the fatigue on the body and what the injuries meant. You get a back injury, you can't pick up weights with people during the next week. So it's just not a good relationship or partnership. I've reflected on this and going, it's amazing now how something like that, which was pretty devastating at the time, has actually now become something massively positive. So would I take it back? No, I don't think I would. I don't think I would, because it's like the impact now that we can have from helping people is huge. I get so many clients that come through and they're like, I want to work with you because you're the only person I've ever spoken to who's actually dislocated the shoulder. So you know what it feels like. You go to your physio who's never dislocated a shoulder, never played contact sport, and they give you exercises and go, this will sort you out. You got no idea. I'm sorry. Like, I respect you as a professional, but you've got no idea what you're talking about, what it feels like to have a shoulder which you think might dislocate when you go into doing a certain movement, or you're worried about catching a bar because it might slip a shoulder. That's a different mindset, which I am now really kind of excited and passionate about, helping other people to work through that and get to a stage where where they can have confidence. Like one last story before I let you come back. I've one guy had 8 dislocations. I sent him for a physio referral because I wanted to check structurally that we were good to go. Brought him back in, went through the training process that we have, and he's been pressing more than he was before he dislocated his shoulder off the back of that history. So it's massively possible. You just have to understand what the process is and what the shoulder needs if it's going to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with your thought process there as well. And if you haven't had a big injury in the past, it seems a bit mad that you wouldn't kind of take that back and never be injured in the first place. But I've had a pretty big injury in the fact that I broke my hip, so I snapped the neck of femur, and that just happened like that. It was so kind of random. There probably was other things going on in the background, but I wouldn't change that at all. You know, I'd probably say I'm still somewhat dealing with the effects of it. I'm not 100% perfect, but the fact that I'm going through that long rehab process means that I can deal with psychological problems when they kind of pop up with an athlete, you know, and have those discussions, and probably more from the psychological side rather than the actual nitty gritty of, okay, I've had an ACL. This is what I did. But yeah, I think there's definitely positives in there, and the lows kind of set up the highs as well.
Yeah, definitely. How did you break your hip?
It's a bit mad actually, mate. So I've always been a bit of a lifter. I've always enjoyed strength training since about 18. I'm 28 now, so what am I? Yeah, 10 years in it. I fairly strong at the time, had like a 200 kilo back squat. It was all going well. And me and the boys started doing a little bit of running. So we'd have a running session every Wednesday, and we was doing red zone running. So it's like a boxing science spin-off with Alan Ruddock, and it was awesome. Like 45-minute kind of treadmill runs, hip based. And probably like 12 weeks into doing that once a week, I thought I'd torn my hip flexor. It just felt really tight. Went to the physio, and he was like, "Yeah, you know, seems like it's just kind of torn a little bit, but we're going to do a little bit of work around your hips because you're pretty impinged." And I've always known that I was quite kind of tight around the capsule anyway. So he started doing some distraction stuff with me. So like basically getting a seatbelt, around his hips, and then anchoring it to the inside of my groin and giving it a little bit of movement, trying to get some grease in there. And you know, retrospectively looking back at that, might not have been the best, but you can never, never, like, there's no way you're going to say, don't do that. You're going to snap his neck of femur. And that, we don't know if that was the problem, but 2 weeks later, just couldn't walk. I walked for about 5 days on what we thought was the broken hip, went in to get some crutches. They x-rayed it and said, "Oh, you broke your hip." I'm like, fuck. it was mad, mate. Like, it came out of, in my head, nowhere. And I guess if we had to put it down to a diagnosis, it was a stress fracture. But at what was I, 23 years old, you would assume that somebody can go and do one run a week, you know, like that wasn't too much loading in my mind. What am I supposed to do? Start off at half a run a week? It's it's a little bit mad. And I think from the psychological side, it was a big struggle because I took a lot of pride in being able to lift. I enjoyed squatting. I enjoyed deadlifting, that kind of powerlifting circle. I enjoyed coaching, and that was kind of on the back burner for a good 4 months, really. Similar to you with your rugby, you connect with that a little bit, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's all context, and I think you think you're right. I think S&C, like I've always said, that you can't, in my mind, and this might be polarizing, but you can't be an effective S&C coach unless you train. Like, it's what you gain and what you learn from your own physical training that you can then use with athletes is invaluable. So if anyone says, "Oh, no, I don't really like training, but I'm an S&C coach," I'm like,
get in the bin. Yeah, it's
you're not going to stay in the industry that long if that's you.
Yeah, and I know what you mean. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that we kind of have to say that's polarizing, you know, to not offend anybody, but it's common sense. It's like it really is common sense. And yeah, I guess we'll leave that one there. But I definitely agree. We are client number one.
Yeah, it's not to discredit anybody else in the industry, but there are people in professional medical or let's say, I'm going to just be very, very top level, who are working with clients and athletes on physical preparation at different levels, who don't train. Like, this is, we're supposed to be more controversial these days because it gets his attention, right? Like, there's a lot of physios that don't train. And I've spoken to really good physios who are massively passionate about getting physios to train, but it's they manage to do a lot of the work without actually having that training type experience. And maybe that's because physio, we're different, right? When we're in S&C, you can train for a specific outcome. It's more, you've got more longevity in it. Rehabilitation type work is pretty much should be for kind of a set period of time. But I still think like trying stuff, understanding what it feels like, working out how you can optimize positions, patterns, loading strategies, all that sort of stuff is like asset number one.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Like, you would not go and learn Spanish from somebody who doesn't speak Spanish, and it's that same type of thing. I know you can understand the logic and everything behind the scenes, but I am 100% with you there, mate. And I think that's probably one of the best career development things and kind of learning that you'll ever do is your own training and kind of messing about.
And I think it's going to be, I can kind of sort of see it happening a little bit now, and I'm probably an example of it. But when I first started in the industry, everyone was kind of a pretty much a generalist in strength and conditioning. We all kind of had a relatively good covering of the major principles and components that we were going to need in athlete preparation. What I see a lot more now is happening. We're getting these real kind of like emergence of specialists in niche areas. So I'll be that S&C coach who hopefully people are going to go, you want about the shoulder? Go and see Tim. There's so much around like plyometrics and force production. There's loads around sprint development and agility. And I see now that we're getting these branches out. And I look at having massively invested in shoulder stuff recently. Like, my knowledge in those areas is not amazing. Like, if you ask me to go and do some real technical sprint work, I haven't done it for years. But I think that's a real, in some ways, we need those generalists who can work with athletes who need a generalist, but also having that opportunity then to kind of go, you need to go and speak to X, Y, and Z person. If you want to go and do lifting work, then Jordan's going to be a better option to take you on that journey than I am. But I think that comes down to us having a certain amount of professional, let's call it humility, or managing your ego in terms of knowing who is the right person for the client. And it's not about me, because if you're good enough at your job, you're going to have the success. But knowing who can help the athlete at the right time, now that we do have much bigger kind of pockets of specialist knowledge, I think is now important, because it goes down that route. I've done more work on shoulders than the majority of people, because that's my story. Other people have done more work on sprinting than I have. So it just makes sense that we kind of share that out a little bit more, I think.
Absolutely. And I feel like to me that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if that is kind of the logical thought with a lot of S&C coaches. But I know a few of my kind of colleagues or friends in the past that are try and just solve that problem. And I guess it's that balancing act, isn't it? There's referring out a client that you think is, it's either too complex for you, or, you're just not in the best situation to work with them, versus actually, it's a little bit out of my depth, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to develop. And I guess it is just that. I guess it's using a little bit of, like you said, humility there, and realizing, okay, it might not be as effective for them in the short term, but I'm going to get to that point really quickly. As soon as it becomes damaging and it's not necessarily about the athlete, then I believe it's a little bit to and fro.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's definitely, I love those opportunities. I get it all the time with the shoulder. Like, there's clients that come through and I'm like, this is a challenge, and we've got to try and unpick what's going on. Just because I'm outside my comfort zone with some of that, you don't always go, right, send off to somebody else, because the chances are that practitioner is also going to be outside of their comfort zone. Like, just because you think that they're better doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have super load of confidence, unless they've got previous experience with that kind of case. So I'm definitely in that space. And that was my story in Paralympic sport, right? At that point, there was no one to refer to. So you're like, right, suck it up. Let's work out how we're going to do this and see what happens. But I think I look back on it, and so one of my reflections is, Jared Deacon said to me once that when you're a coach, you have lots of different opportunities to be successful. When you're an athlete, you've got one career. And I look back at decisions I made from a coaching perspective with athletes, where I was like guessing, if I'm honest. Like, there's a certain amount of guesswork, and we all do that. You got your 80% staples and 20% to play with and all that sort of stuff, which is great. But there was times where athletes didn't perform well, and I may, and it's not always just all about the S&C, have contributed to that lack of performance that we were looking for at an important point. I just think there is that place of just going, like, sometimes just learning on the hoof, or like trying something out and hoping that it works. Now we have access to more specialists, and this is where networking comes in. And is there a greater opportunity for shared knowledge, and people not being protective of their own kind of like little circle? About going, what have you done in swimming before? Did maximal strength work? Was that effective for you with a 100-meter breaststroker who is a double leg amputee? Or was it more of the fact, which is what I found, where I tried the linear progression around strength work through that athlete under the carefully thought out rationales. But what actually helped and was more effective for her was a massive amount of volume, massive amount of strength endurance, 1 kilo, 20 times. And rather than going like any kind of heavy base work. And it all came down to the learning lesson from this was I said to her, when do you feel best in the water? And she's like, beginning of the season, when we do volume, that's when I feel best. When do you feel worse? When we're doing heavy. All right, let's just go light and see what happens. Broke a PB she'd not touched for 5 years, 3 times in 3 months. Okay, that was a good choice. But so there is that whole thing of balancing out the trial and error. Do we try it? How we are working and have that responsibility. I take that quite seriously for an athlete's career. And you're not, as I said, you're not the only person in that system, but you can definitely have an impact on that. So there's lots of other variables. Well, I started off in S&C thinking it's all about S&C. What I do, an athlete does well, like that's what I did. I did that work. And then the longer you stay, and you're like, I probably just, they might have been successful despite what I did.
Yeah.
So there's many kinds, it's probably a relatively convoluted discussion, but there's just interesting perspectives, I think, maybe for people just to think about. And I think that maybe just helps just to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, when you're doing it, all that sort of stuff.
Hi guys, I'm just going to take a brief break in today's podcast to talk to you about the Adapt online strength and conditioning coaching service. At Adapt, we put the athlete first and make sure that the whole program is set up around them, their goals, their sport, and their lifestyle to achieve the best possible performances. Our aim is to deliver an elite level coaching experience that typically isn't always commercially available if not part of a professional club or performance pathway system. We communicate with our athletes on a weekly and sometimes daily basis, making changes in technique and making alterations to the program based on how you're performing on any given day. We also bring in experts from psychologists, nutritionists and physiotherapists for online educational workshops to make sure we are giving you all the tools necessary to excel in your sport. So if you're looking to take your physicality to the next level and want to invest in yourself, head over to the website at adaptstrength.co.uk for more information, including some success stories of our current athletes, or drop me a message to set up a chat to discuss the options. Hope you're enjoying today's podcast, so let's get back to it. So shoulders then, let's get into the nitty gritty there. I guess let's start it off pretty broad. Like what are you seeing more often than not when it comes to shoulders? Like you're dealing with people that have shoulder pain, some people that don't have shoulder pain but want to be able to perform highly. What are some of the kind of common problems or things that you're tackling?
Yeah, great question. So let's say there's probably 2 different elements there, but they maybe come down to the same thing. To put it into a nutshell, there's generally a lack of awareness, understanding from a coaching and sort of client end perspective of the space between late stage rehabilitation and then what we would typically deem as more performance oriented training or progressive overload, as we would typically look at from an uninjured population. So we have a massive amount of knowledge around the shoulder from physiotherapy and rehabilitation literature. It's really good. That's where everything is directed. Because of the nature of doing academic work and research, it's quite difficult to do training-based studies. So we don't have a lot around the shoulder. And even if you go to one of the journals and look at how many articles were published around the shoulder versus the lower body, it's massively focused on lower limb, possibly because it's easier to study and to test for whatever reasons. So where we find ourselves, I think, is that where physiotherapy typically finishes and then our typical strength and conditioning practices begin, there's a big space in there where physiotherapists aren't that confident with the loading that needs to happen to get them to a place where we can go back to maximal strength military press or max strength bench press type work. And then strength and conditioning coaches are probably lacking in their skills and understanding as to how do we bring people through from that late stage rehabilitation, robustness type of work, whatever you want to kind of call it, even with uninjured population. What are the things which actually make the shoulder function effectively? We know that from a physiotherapy perspective, what the shoulder needs: range of motion, neuromuscular control, kinetic chain integration. They're like 3 staples. But how do we scale that? That's the thing where I think we need to understand is how do we change how do we prepare the shoulder for the demands we want to place upon it by giving it what it needs? Because oftentimes we'll see people with shoulder injuries that are doing a standard strength and conditioning program, but still pick up a shoulder problem. Why is that? Is it a workload management issue? Is it the fact that we've neglected the work around the rotator cuff or focusing on scapular rotation because we don't observe it, we don't see it, we're not looking for it? We haven't got anything in the program which is actively going out there to kind of protect it. And then how do we then also think about scaling dynamic stability? So we can have athletes in the gym. We're going to go, right, let's go and do a 4-week block. We're going overhead pressing based work, and we're going to go and push 5-10% improvements, whatever it might be, across that training block in strength, force output. So numbers on the bar are going up, but we're still warming up with a red band or a 1.525 kilo scapula, and that doesn't change. So we think about from a physiological perspective, an architecture of the joint. If you think about the humeral head is 3 times bigger than the socket that it sits on. So we're effectively balancing a ball on a tee, a golf ball on a tee. The shoulder is like massively dependent on dynamic stability. And I think from a structural integrity perspective, if we think about how much force the brain is going to allow the musculature around the shoulder to produce, that's going to be massively dictated by how stable that joint is or its perception of stability. So to put this into a working example that people will probably be able to relate to, if you've got somebody who's got some kind of shoulder baggage or history, they're doing dumbbell shoulder press, they're grinding out the last couple of reps, and all of a sudden the shoulder just shuts down and it stops working. The shoulder's still in the socket. There's been no sublux or dislocation, but something neurally has happened to stop that rep from being completed. And my assumption or guess is in that space, it's the brain is trying to protect the joint because it's sensing instability for whatever reason, or that's at least part of the potential problem. So if we can do something to improve dynamic stability, make it easier for, or more effective or more efficient for the ball of the humerus, head of the humerus to stay on the socket, and the socket of this to stay on the ball, that's that articulation between the humerus and the scapula. If that has got high levels of dynamic stability, we can produce more force. But at the moment, what's happening, I think, is people are missing this piece in the middle where they can actually get massive return on investment from an injury prevention perspective and potentiation for strength and power outputs by working on the dynamic stability of the shoulder, because that is all you've got when it comes down to it. And look at the architecture of the joint. We label it as a ball and socket. It's very different to the hip because of the different sizes of the head of the humerus versus femur, acetabulum, and the fossa on the scap.
I think that that was a great answer, mate. I'm glad I had a copy because I was like, right, that's good. I'm going to remember all this. But that dynamic stability piece makes a lot of sense to me as well. You know, that shutting off from the CNS to the shoulder and all the force production muscles, all those things. You know, and I kind of think of that like a car. You know, you're not going to want to kind of floor it and put your foot down on the gas if you don't have very good brakes, or your steering is not great. You're going to hold back a little bit for the safety of, you know, the car or whatever. And same thing with the shoulder in my eyes. Yeah. What with that then? I guess dynamic stability, how are you approaching that? Because obviously it's not just one range of motion. Do you kind of space out between going horizontal, overhead? Do you go in different directions?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where the physical literacy conversation comes back in, or the athleticism around the shoulder. So the way that I tend to work, and if I put it into programming speak, so coaches are good at, like, programming is good, right? We understand programs, reps, and sets.
We love it.
So typically I've got 2 sections of my training program: dynamics and conditioning. Dynamics is focused on mechanics, movement, and kinetic chain integration. So that's back to what I talked about before around the physio literature. How do we sort of take care of some of that stuff, because we know that it works? So they'll often, if I've got clients come in who are injured, or got some sort of shoulder pain, whatever, we're going to do some external rotation work. We're going to do some work on range of motion. We're going to do some work on scapular stability or range of motion through upward rotation, typically is what people need. So I'm going to go and fix some of the kinematics and kinetics around the shoulder from an isolated perspective. The trick there is, and how do we take that fundamental piece of giving the shoulder what it needs, and we can scale all of that. There's lots of progressions in there. We can make upward rotation work way more difficult if we think about how we can scale those different exercise progressions. But what I want to do then is then go and take that into some kinetic chain integration. So I want to go and take the shoulder, the isolated kind of focus that we've placed around it, and then what I want to do is bridge that into the system. The shoulder has to be part of the kinetic chain, or integrated into the kinetic chain, if it's going to be successful. If it's not, we have all sorts of problems, and that's a kind of a bigger conversation of how the shoulder is then live, or the risk of injury around the shoulder. So we integrate it in, and we might go some ground-based movement. So we might integrate it into a high hip bear crawl, where we can get some more serratus anterior. We can focus on stability. We can prolong the time between hands touching and leaving the floor. And so we can build in that a little bit of complexity around a movement pattern, and start to build in some gradual exposure to stability, kinetic chain integration. We might then move that into in our conditioning section, which is focused more on building performance related motor attributes and skills, which are going to be useful, beneficial, or lead to performance improvements in a specific task or environment. And there's an interesting point there because we need to always be thinking about what we're working towards. So even when I'm training the dynamics, this bit around the kind of reconditioning type focus, what am I actually preparing for? Where am I trying to get back to? Because the lightest TheraBand work is not going to get me ready for the rugby pitch. So I've got to do something which is going to help that shoulder to be more stable because of where I'm trying to get to. And also think about the amount of chaos. How much chaos are we going into? If it's a rugby pitch, massive amount of chaos. Shoulder can be hitting by high forces in pretty much any position. Swimming, less chaos, but massive amount of workload. So that conditioning piece might get me into ring-based work. I love the gymnastics rings because it creates a level of instability. You can get strong on them. You have to get kinetic chain integration. You can't move on rings particularly well if you don't integrate the shoulder with the pelvis. We can then move in all different positions and we can start to explore those degrees of freedom that the shoulder has. I think you've also got these options to make that athleticism more at the forefront of a training program where on a bench, we'll go the same movement pattern 10 times. Well, if I go into rings, why can't I go into a ring fly, archer push up, into some very different variations, working in all that different range of motion that I have access to and challenge the shoulder to shift from one position to another? Because that's more like the chaos I'm going to encounter in sport. We're not going to have, if we do bench press, right? Like, you know, if someone's going to come in, you're going to hand off a guy in rugby, like you're not going to hand off a guy right in front of you where we actually are strong. We're going to drop our shoulder and try and bowl into him. Whereas if the handoff is often going to come like in an abducted position or at a funny angle that we're not really that comfortable with, how much context has the brain got about being stable and strong in that shape if we only ever do bench press? Not a lot. So in that conditioning angle, we can start to bring in ring-based work, more ground-based movement work. We might do some hanging progressions. And then we're also going to go and do open kinetic chain-based movements with kettlebells, barbells, and dumbbells. It's still in there. It's just how do we bridge the gap from bench press back into stuff which is actually going to make that bench press more, going to give us the opportunity to create more output in the bench press potentially, but also just to facilitate that development of athleticism around the shoulder, because the bench isn't enough in my mind to safeguard the shoulder or prepare it for the demands you're going to place on it in some of the sports that we work with.
Mate, again, I think that all makes a lot of sense to me, just in terms of preparing that stability around the shoulder joint in all the different ranges and planes of motion that you're gonna experience, you know. And I think the plane or range of motion you don't train in is generally going to be the one that you get injured in, you know. And I think kind of building that up is huge. So are you saying that you do still kind of bench press and everything, but it feeds into it in a slightly different way?
Yeah, I typically don't bench the guys that I'm working with often, you know, because a lot of them are coming from a place of needing some reconditioning support rather than actually going like, I want to kick on and I've got this athletic performance objective. That's currently where we're working more so. But even within that, I'm probably going to go dumbbell press over bench, just because I think this is a quote. I've had a conversation with Ian Horsley, who's like leads the upper limb rehabilitation for the EIS. So if you've got a shoulder injury and you're an elite sport in the UK, you go and see Ian typically as a first port of call. And he's like, tell me why we bench? Why do we bench? Like why would you bench over dumbbell chest press heavy? And like ask that question.
Yeah.
It's people, why? Because we like it, because it makes it feels good. And it has got some benefits, possibly, but it's definitely not the only solution. Like what I think, and I spoke to Gary Hutt, who you'll know is Sheffield based as well. And he started using some of the ring work with the guys and with his boxing athletes. And he was like, they love it because it feels more like what they've got to do in their sport and environment. One of the reasons for that will be because they have to integrate the kinetic chain. And I'm saying like people go body weight on the rings. That's a bit easy. I want to go and do a 150 kilo bench. You're like, okay, well, let's go and do that. Let's go and set up that ring environment. So it's a 5 rep max for you or a 4 rep max. There's nothing wrong with that if you've earned the right to progress to be in that environment with that kind of intensity. So put a weight vest on, put a band across the shoulders, and now go and manage that instability and produce force at the same time. People's chests will be on fire if they do that. And it's a completely different stimulus. Not to say that bench doesn't have a place. For some people, it will. But for me, there's a whole piece of the puzzle which is actually way more important than what you're going to do on the bench press from a functional athletic perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I think, do you go overhead with everybody? Is that something that you?
Always.
That's like a yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's essentially what we're trying to get back to. Like most
yeah,
people want to be able to go overhead. So with the progressions around that, if we're going to go this blend of closed kinetic chain work, which is like the gymnastics ring, ground-based movement, hanging, hand balancing, all that sort of stuff, merging that with the open kinetic chain work, typically we'll start people with landmine presses, inverted kettlebell shoulder presses, because there's a bigger conversation there about why those work, but they're quite good at bringing people back into overhead pressing patterns. And then absolutely when they've got through and they're getting that range of motion and it feels good and we're not getting pain in the shoulder drum and pressing patterns, then we're going back into dumbbells and military presses. My training will have like heavy overhead presses, military press stuff in there. I'll have clusters in there. We'll do some Olympic lifting in there. It's all about like, I'm never going to say to somebody, don't do that thing. I'm like, what do you want to do? Okay, well, let's get you back to doing that.
yeah, I think I can remember this would have been a few years ago, and sometimes you do get drawn into the social media bollocks a little bit, and you look at different discussions that people are having, and this discussion was literally around that overhead piece of you've got an overhead athlete. Why would you bother to do overhead work with them anymore? And the back and forth was like, well, they're going overhead, so you want to make sure they've got the strength and the stability above that so that they can perform those thousands and thousands of reps effectively. What's your take on that?
Oh, why wouldn't you
Here we
like
go.
this? Let me clear my throat. So this thing about going, right, okay, let's use swimming example, right? So if we go, well, we don't need to go overhead because we do it in our sports-based practice. Okay. At what intensity? So let's say we've got a tennis athlete or a swimmer. Swimmer's a great example. You're going to go overhead like thousands of times a week. Well, the major focus of when we were with British Swimming with the para program that I was leading there, from a coaching perspective, this is something they massively bought into. From a physio perspective, it's something they massively bought into. Strength is armor. Strength was all about keeping athletes in the water. And what we find is that if you've got weaker athletes, they'll have more injuries because their shoulders can't handle the demands of the environment that we're going to place them into, exactly as I've been saying already. So what strength does is it provides a level of capacity, it provides a level of endurance, it provides a level of being able to handle forces. We're training in the gym and we can start to apply different stimulus, which are going to improve the robustness, improving the brain's connection with the shoulder, all that dynamic stability piece. I think if you're just going to rely on sports-based training where, okay, you're producing high speeds, high forces, but in a sport-specific manner, if we aren't preparing the system for that with strength training, then we're just going to see broken athletes. Mm-hmm. I was reflecting on this the other week. Ross Edgley, right, swam around the UK. Mm-hmm. Right? No one's ever done that before. Why did Ross do that and his shoulder not blow up? Because he swam further than our Olympics swimmers will swim in a whole season, probably. Like, it was a long way in really rough conditions. One of the things is he's flipping strong and he's done a lot of strength work. I guarantee that's part of the solution. He's not built any different fundamentally to anybody else. And so he's got the same bone structure around his shoulder. But how did he manage to do that type of volume in those conditions in open water with waves and everything else he was dealing with? I mean, the guy's strong. N equals 1, right? But let's not discount N equals 1. It's useful to think about.
Yeah. I think there's always context that goes into these types of discussions, isn't there? And I think these slogans get thrown around quite a lot, like S&C should be giving the athlete what they don't get in the sport. And I'm like, yeah, it's good to kind of fill all the buckets and make sure that we've got no weaknesses, but sooner or later you're going to have to kind of look at that sport specific action or skill and think, well, actually, what is that armor around that thing that's going to allow them to do that for long term? And I think, I just find it interesting having these discussions with people because everyone has a slightly different take based off, their kind of experiences.
I'm biased. So like
I'm biased.
I'm strength based. Like I think strength's useful. I can do more stuff with my shoulders now because my shoulders are stronger than they used to be. They're less fragile. Like I wasn't when I was playing rugby and dislocating shoulders. And this is like where you can kind of pull research and ideas apart. But I don't play rugby anymore. I don't dislocate my shoulders anymore. So is it strength or is it the fact I don't play rugby anymore? Like there's a question. But the confidence that I have, I used to sit on the sofa and like put my hand behind my neck to sit there and just watch TV and feel like my shoulder was going to sublux. Like that wasn't a good place to be. Whereas now, like I don't have any of those problems and I'm a lot stronger than I was. The way that I trained when I was having problems with my shoulder was very much around my bro-based hypertrophy. It was very much a chest as much as you can and kind of fill the rest of the stuff up. That wasn't good for my shoulder. And obviously S&C programs are going to be more balanced than that. But I just think it's, people are always going to have different perceptions. I think whether what background you come from, But this is where I think we've got this. There's an opportunity to work with technical coaches and for people to look at the sport specific demands. And the stuff that I'm doing probably looks like it makes more sense. Somebody goes like, should you bench press if you want to get swim fast? I'm like, well, it's not even in a plane of motion that you're going to need to move in the water. So what's the point? Like a coach could look at that and go, I don't see why that's adding value to my program. But if I go, I'm going to stick you guys into some ring-based work and I'm going to get you into overhead positions and I'm going to ask you to load in flexion, like, okay, yeah, that's pretty good. And you're integrating the core at the same time. Okay, that kind of makes a lot of sense. That should work. That's part of the battle in elite sport. Is like you've got to get the coaches on board with what you're trying to do. And if you can do that, then you get more input and more responsibility for the physical preparation of the athlete. So playing that game is part of it. But this is all off the basis of I guarantee this stuff works. Like 100% this stuff will work for people.
I can remember one of the first conversations we kind of had at the Uni of Warwick when we was kind of collaborating with Carrie, and you were speaking through the Nottingham Trent stuff of saying what you said before. The rugby team, they just didn't want to do lower body, so you said, we'd say at the beginning, right, boys, we're going to do a little bit of squatting, but we're going to finish off with a load of arms. We're going to shut the blinds. You can take your top off, do your arms, whatever, So building that buy-in piece, and I think just going back to that bench press. I program bench fair bit, depending on the athlete and if there's any reason not to. But part of the first conversation I'll have with them is, what do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? What do you find benefit in? What helps your game? And if they say, I love bench press, I'll be like, well, okay, let's weigh through those things in my mind. Is it dangerous for them at this point? Have they had any history of not liking it? And, you're always kind of weighing up those pros and cons and gradually nudging somebody towards where you think that optimal will be. I guess that's just in the umbrella of building buy-in and long-term kind of trust.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to attack that as well, because yes, to get a new athlete on board for sure, there's like, tell me what you want to do. Like, what do you like? Because if I write a program that you don't like, you're not going to do it and you're not going to think it's going to work. So that evolution of that relationship with the athlete is massively significant. And I think the other thing is I would package that up and go, what do you like? Okay, you like bench, right? What if I said I could put 5 to 10% on your bench, like quickly? People would be like, oh, yeah, I'll try that. All right, let's do some of this sort of stuff and see what happens. Here's the rationale. Does it make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Let's go. Like it's around stuff with the snatch as well, like or overhead based patterns. If people built in some handstand work, do you think that's going to have a benefit on snatch? Well, the load is entirely different, but the fact is your brain is going to have to do a huge amount of work to develop proprioception at end range. So when you're trying to catch a heavy bar, the confidence that your brain has got in an overhead position is going to be improved if it's got better joint position sense and kinetic awareness. We can train those things through hand balancing and build stability and integrate the kinetic chain at the same time. It doesn't need to be, depending on the athlete, or like this or this. It can be this and this. So I've got clients that will do, I have worked people in the past that will go, okay, it's a bench day. Just give me a couple of sets on the ring push-ups to start off with. What that's doing for us is just starting to get us into a better movement pattern. We're connecting the chain, thinking about how that scapula can move around the rib cage. So we're firing up some serratus anterior. We're getting a little bit more kind of dynamic stability demand, particularly if we'd ask people not to lean on the rings or on the strap, so then they're having to do a little bit more of that work. Do that first and then go on bench. Like we have now and let's just kind of put it back into what we know. If we were going to go and do some heavy squatting where we're looking power-based work, we'd prime the system first and we'd be really clear on why we were doing that. But I don't think we prime the upper body but we have different options to build that priming or dynamic stability before we go after our target lifts. So again, it could be a reconditioning kind of piece. It could be a performance piece. But if you bring it into what does the shoulder need? And if you're going to go and if the shoulder needs more dynamic stability, let's find ways to do that. Because if we think that dynamic stability is going to be useful in creating more force output, then we should be training it. If we don't, then let's just train force. But I think if we can warrant hip stability, we can 100% warrant shoulder stability.
Yeah, I think, going back to what you said before around kind of bridging the gap between the isolated prep work into the more dynamic stuff. I think back to some of the things I used to read on, like T Nation and Poliquin and all those things, and Matt Wenning, and they love face pulls and external rotations, band pull aparts, and all those, and they preach this, do that before you bench, and I think there's a lot of good in that. I think there's probably a lot of bad in that as well, depending on how you kind of look at it. But they're priming the system in a way, in a slightly different way to what you're kind of speaking about there. Of it's not the same movement pattern. You're not actually creating stability globally, through that area. But what's your thoughts on those types of things? Your face pulls, and I think it was Poliquin who was probably one of the big advocates of it at that time.
Yeah, it's all of my programs. So there's I don't really have any bad movements. Like there's stuff that I don't lean towards, and you can rationalize why in terms of stuff that I've probably got biased around. Like I don't program upright rows. Is it a bad exercise? Well, depends who it's for. Just because for a lot of people it'll put a lot of pressure on the shoulder. I don't do behind the neck pressing for most people. Not to say that some people can't. It's just make a decision based on what's right for that client and what they're working towards. But I think, yeah, I use face pulls in the programs and band-based work in the programs. And I think it's that piece of going like, what's the focus for today? So if we go back to like the model that I was talking about before, when I come into a session, if I'm going to go upper body and let's say the target lift for that session is going to be bench, what are my objectives in terms of preparing to do well or to get the most out of that bench? Well, I want some range of motion, probably, because I need that shoulder to move. Even though it's not massive, we're not going over the head, I'm probably going to want to do something to just optimize the kinematics around the joint from a sense of if that pec is like rammed on super tight, it might make sense to give myself a little bit of extension because I'm going to have to come into shoulder extension and that's going to play around with the shoulder in that bottom position. So let's maybe mobilize out the anterior shoulder. I'm then going to need some neuromuscular control. So let's do some band work. Let's get the shoulder kind of working. Let's get some temperature in there. Let's isolate some of that musculature. And then I want some kinetic chain integration. All right, let's go and do some ring push-ups. Now I'm going in, like I'm prepped because I've kind of done those three things: range of motion, neuromuscular control, and kinetic chain integration. So I'm bringing it all together and then going, okay, let's jump on the bench. Good to go. Because we've kind of primed it there to actually go and lift heavy. Whereas what a lot of people would do is like, well, they'll probably do some prep work, but how extensive is it in terms of actually then getting ready to go on bench? And I was at the gym this morning and there's two guys that every Friday they do CrossFit all week and then Friday's bench. Their warm up is bench. Like there's no messing about on a Friday. It's in one set on the bar and now we're loading. And I'm like, well, I would say that's not the optimal way to prepare to bench.
Oh, you do some of these. You do some of them ones.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you swing your arm around a bit. Oh, that hurts a little bit. Don't worry. Let's crack on. Time's ticking. Yeah.
Muscularity. With, I guess, rings, and I think some gyms have them, some gyms don't. You said you're training like a CrossFit gym, so I imagine, they've got them there. It's more functional in that nature. Most gyms probably have more TRXs. Are they comparable? Are they the same? Are they slightly different? If you don't have rings, is TRX good enough? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't use TRX or suspension trainers, and there's a couple of different reasons why. Let's start at the bottom. Rings are cheap. Like, buy a set for 12 quid off Amazon and take them to the gym and put them up. It's the cheapest, most effective piece of training equipment for the upper body, bar none. It's super transportable, highly effective, and I would just get some, right. So you go and hook them up, tie them up onto the pull-up bar, squat rack at the gym, wherever you're going to train and crack on. The problem with TRX for me is it's slightly over-engineered version of what the gymnastics rings are. I don't know there's a massive benefit of using a TRX over a set of rings. With the rings where you can actually set the ring up directly below the anchor point on the bar, so you get a better sort of line of trajectory, if you like, of where the implement is that you're pushing on versus where it's anchored. Whereas a TRX will often come into a V shape. And what they did with TRX as well, which kind of makes sense from an exercise general population perspective, is they put a little bit of a slip in the top of the TRX. So if you're going to try and do something where you're shifting weight from side to side, that TRX will slip as you go through the movement because they're trying to do it so you can set it up, which is the thing you do with rings, is you have to kind of get the straps exactly the same length. So it's just that little bit of like, you could say that adds in a little bit of a dynamic stability challenge when you're halfway through an archer push-up and all of a sudden the TRX shifts. But if you haven't got anything, you can definitely use them as a starting point. I personally, my bias is I like the rings. I like the simplicity of them. They're more comfortable to use. And I think I can do more with them than I can with the TRX because the anchor point sets everything up. You can just get into better positions with it.
Yeah, that just kind of jumped out to me, mate, because I've never even really thought about it. It's just not been in my brain of thinking, rings versus TRX. And I'm sure there's a few kind of examples where a TRX could be more beneficial, just thinking about that strap, and it might be a little bit more comfortable if that type of thing. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point for me. That's something
But
I need to mull it over. But if you said 12 quid, I could probably spend the same on a cheap TRX or suspension trainer. I think the actual
yeah,
TRXs are a few hundred quid.
they used to be 100 over 100 quid, and I was like, there's
Nah.
definitely not that much more value in it for sure.
Yeah.
I think they tried them both, and I would just I like the simplicity of it as well. Like it didn't need changing. If you're if you're working with Gen Pop, and like the one thing that a TRX is better for is if you put your feet in it. If you're doing like hands on the floor, feet in a TRX type movement, like walkbacks and that sort of thing, then they are better because it's more comfortable on your feet. But again, like for the amount of time that you do that, just like sorry, but toughen up. It'll be all right. It's
Yeah.
not going to be that long.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not allowed to say toughen up, mate. It's
I
polarizing.
know it's bullying now, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
you can't do that anymore.
Cool. I have one more question for you around the relationship between grip and shoulder stability, dynamic
Oh,
stability.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's go.
I
Give me
love
your thoughts on
this.
it. Yeah, let me
There's
know.
some really good research around this. So grip is a really good measure of cuff stability or cuff activation. So there's some good study. Ian Horsley's actually, people want to go and learn about grip strength, go and have a look at some of the work that he did on rugby players. And basically, this study was testing grip and external rotation force with a dynamometer. Um, Essentially, what we can do, what we can take from the research is that if you test grip, it will give you an indication of readiness or cuff strength. Let's kind of very broadly put it under that component. So an application of that could be like we used to do with swimming is we would grip strength test the guys every morning. So they would come in before they go into the pool, they grip test, they do their movement prep or their pre-pool work, and then they grip test again. And if the grip test is gone up and it's back in line with their base level, then we're good to go from a readiness to train perspective. If they came in, the grip strength was down, and then they do their movement prep and it stays down, we might then go and do some additional movement prep. And if we can get it up, we'll train. If we can't get that grip strength up to something close to baseline, then we'll modify the session. So we used to use it as a tool in knowing whether the shoulder was going to be able to handle the session that the athlete was going to go into. So from like a risk mitigation perspective, effectively. You often will see people who struggle with grip who've got issues around the cuff as well. So I think you've got to find those opportunities within training to one, utilize the benefit of grip's relationship with shoulder stability. So oftentimes if I'm doing kettlebell overhead pressing with clients or landmine pressing or even external rotation based work, I'm like, squeeze the life out of that thing, like grip it hard, because by purely adding that grip component, we're going to get better activation of the cuff. So that is like a really easy way to build in. Can we improve cuff strength by gripping in the sense of do we get a training effect? I don't know at this stage, but I'm thinking that if we've got opportunities within the training environment to grip more, and that way we put into some of the hang progressions that are used, like single arm hanging based work, it's a bit different to kind of like a real tight grip because you're kind of hanging on in a slightly different position. But all of this sort of stuff just builds in and just going, well, if it's a dose, if it's a small stimulus towards some kind of cuff focused adaptation, then for me it's a positive thing. So readiness, build it into the training. And I've used it before as well. I've got a client at the moment who was issues with one side left arm, like massive historical problem. When we go through my grip testing, his grip strength in his left side is way down compared to his right. So now I've got a performance marker to come back and go, well, let's see if we can improve that grip strength by doing this training program. And that's going to then give me an indication that the cuff is better prepared or more symmetrical to where we are with your uninjured arm.
I suppose is that in the same kind of bracket as what you spoke about before? Is the grip being stopped from excelling because the shoulder stability isn't great, or are you just thinking that it hasn't had a strong stimulus through the lack of shoulder strength that's resulted in it being weaker, or both?
Good question. Could be a combination of both. So are we seeing grip strength down because the cuff is suboptimal? Let's kind of just put it as a very broad term, like possibly, or is the cuff down because grip's not been trained? This guy's got a great training background, so I suspect it's more likely going to be the cuff issue is relating through to the grip strength. He can't grip as tight because the cuff can't produce the stability around the joint. People can do this as a real simple working example. So if you just put your hand out in front of you and you just let someone kind of move it around, there's like that shoulder will move around all over the place. Squeeze as tight as you can. All of a sudden, the shoulder just tightens up and attaches itself to the torso, and then we actually have to move the whole system. So it's a real kind of simple connection, really, from that perspective. And I think, if people are interested, I said Ian Horsley did some really good work on that. Very simple, very accessible to read, and provides a good rationale for why you should be thinking about potentially including that in parts of the program.
That's something, I guess, even outside of it being specifically a stability exercise through the shoulder, like I always tell people to grip. Like I pretty much always do it. And it doesn't matter if it's a deadlift, a squat, a pull up, a press, like there is an effect. There is a CNS kind of switch on, in my opinion. Like it connects you to that bar a little bit more. You're trying to squeeze a barbell trying to make it into a pencil. It works. And, I don't know if there is research that backs that up as a coaching cue, but, anecdotally, game changer. You get a bit out of it.
There's definitely, from a coaching cue perspective and a movement response in the shoulder. So that there will definitely be situations where people have got shoulder pain, pressing overhead. If you cue them to grip and they press overhead, that pain will either be decreased or gone. So that there's definitely something there where you're going, if you can get people, if you've got pain, try gripping and see what it does in terms of just basically creating stability on the shoulder, which can then potentially optimize the mechanics and therefore give you a better pain or less pain through a potential range of motion.
Yeah, that's quality. I think that could be a nice little takeaway for people as kind of a final point, just play around with that and see. Cool. I'm going to wrap it up, mate. I just want to thank you for your time today. I think that's been absolutely quality. I think there's going to be a shitload of value in there for people. I know they're going to enjoy it. Where can people find you? Where can people learn more about what you're doing and generally just about the shoulder?
Yeah, thank you for having me. There was great questions in there, mate, as well. Good job on that one. dynamicshoulders.com is the website. We are probably most active on Instagram. So it's at Dynamic Shoulders. And if you want to get in touch with me directly, it's hello@dynamicshoulders.com. So you can feel free to kind of follow up any questions. People want to get in touch afterwards. We're trying to put out more and more kind of content as this thing starts to scale, that hopefully just snippets that will be useful for people and things that they can start to try. And the take home message really for me is to take the attitude of play towards some of this stuff. If anything that we've talked about is kind of challenged people's biases and gone, you know what, like, I can't talk about bench press like that. Well, just like use yourself as an experiment. If you're a coach listening to this, go and do some work on the rings and then come back to me and then allow yourself to go through that rethinking process. And if anybody's like, just a final book recommendation, because I take every opportunity I can. I think there's a massive opportunity in the climate that we live in at the moment to make sure that we are thinking for ourselves. So Adam Grant's book, Think Again, is definitely a recommendation for people, because we are so swayed by what we see on social and the echo chamber that creates. Having that scientist mindset, most of us are from a science background, but it's a really easy, accessible book that people can pick up, and it will just, I encourage people to read that. It talks about the power of knowing what you don't know. And that's sometimes uncomfortable, but it's actually the avenue to really good success if we can start to embrace that mindset.
That's awesome, mate. That's awesome. Cool. I'll put all your information in the show notes below. I'll put the Think Again book, and I'll put some of the research that you mentioned from Ian Horsley.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a look at that one for sure, around the grip strength particularly.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks again, mate. That was absolutely quality.
Thanks for having me. Speak to you soon.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Adapt Performance podcast. Let me know what you thought about the episode by leaving a review or sending me a direct message. I'm all for receiving the honest feedback to make sure the episodes grow and get better and better. Like, share, subscribing and following all goes a long way to making sure the podcast reaches the right people. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.